Hey guys, it's Andrew from Seemu Apps. In this tutorial, we're going to be creating a web service which interacts with a database, and it's going to get data from the database and return it in a JSON format, which is pretty much universally understood by all programming languages. We're going to return it to our app and print it out to the console, but it's something you might use in a table view, in a view, in a collection view, and so on, pretty much anywhere you could think of in your app. So let's get into it. So let's look at a high level how an iOS app might connect to a database through a web service and return a standard JSON response, which is universally understood by pretty much every programming language out there. So starting off at the app, it will send a request to a web server, and we're going to call our request getClasses. The web server is then going to query the database on our behalf. The database is going to return the results to the web server. So in our case, we're going to query the classes table in the database for all the items in that table. That will return it to the web server. Then the web server is going to do some massaging on the data and return that back to the app in a JSON format with an array of classes. And then our app is going to be able to display the classes to the end user. So the reason why we follow this sort of structure with having an app, a web server, and database is that we can easily swap out any component. So we could swap out the web server to be a different web server, easily modify it. It also adds extra security as the app cannot access the database directly. It has to go through the web server, so it acts as a sort of guard kind of in its way, making sure the app can only do certain things with the database. And also the web server can translate the database queries to a JSON response and return that as a standard format, which is understood by our app. And so that can then parse it, then display it to the user and do further manipulation on that data as required. So let's get into it. It's going to be broken up into 3 different bits. So we're going to set up our database first of all. Then we'll set up our web server. Then we'll set out our app to call the web server. So let's get into it. Okay guys, to set up our web service and database, I'm going to use Bluehost as I already have hosting with them. I find them quite flexible and easy to set up anything you want. So you can see a link on screen in one of the corners or in the description below. This is an affiliate link, so this does help me provide you with high quality tutorials. If you already have your own web service and database, you can also use that. You'll just have to link it into yourself to the app. The instructions here will be for Bluehost, but you should be able to figure out yourself pretty easy if you already have your own one. Otherwise, you can use Bluehost, which is quite cheap for the basic pack, which is just all we need for this tutorial. So let's get into it. Okay, so once we have our Bluehost hosting set up, you'll see a dashboard like similar here. And what you want to do is go to hosting, and then you'll see a second series set of menus, and you want to go to cPanel. This is your control panel where we can set up our new database, set up access to the database, and upload files to our website. So what we want to do, if we scroll down, we're going to see an area called Database Tools, and we'll want to go to MySQL Databases. Now once this loads up, you'll see some information about all the MySQL databases you have. You might already have some set up. Not to worry, we're just going to create a new one. We'll see up the top here we can create a new database. So we're going to create a new database called students. So that name of it will be Seemu app _ students. Yours will be different depending on the user account you created. So once you've typed in students, go to create database. You'll get to this screen, then we'll go back and we'll be able to see our new database in our list. So we can see it here, Seemu app _ students. Now the next step, to be able to use this database, we need to add a new user, which will be used by our web service to be able to access this database or have permissions to access it. So we're going to name our username teacher, and we're going to set the password to be P@SSW0RD, and I'll put that on screen now, the password I used. So username teacher, password is a password on screen. Then we go create a user. You'll get this similar screen again, so we'll go back once we successfully have created the teacher user. And if we scroll to the bottom now, we see this add user to a database. So we want to select Seemu app _ teacher, which is the user we created. And the database is Seemu app _ students. So remember, your prefix will be different to Seemu app, or be whatever the name of the website or account you set up in your hosting. So select teacher for user, database of students, go add. And we're just going to give it all privileges and go make changes. So once that's done, let's go back and we have our database and database user set up. We can now actually set up some test data in our database. So to do that, go back to your cPanel. And scroll back on down to database tools. And we want to select PHP My Admin. So this is going to be a web interface to administer our database, so we can create tables, add data to it, delete data, manipulate data, and so on. So on the left here, if we expand it out, we'll see our students database. So click on that to get into it. And by default, there'll be no tables in the database. So we'll be taken to the create table screen. So we want to create a new table called classes, all in lowercase, and number of columns we're going to leave as 4 by default. Go. And then here, we'll fill this out as name. Type will be variable character, so varchar, length 99. Next one is going to be room, also varchar with 99 length. And finally, we'll add teacher name as a variable char, length 99. So varchar is essentially a text field, is the best analogy to explain it if you haven't used a database before. And we can put up to 99 characters in each of these fields. So once that's done, we want to hit save. That's going to process our SQL request and create our table. So now that's created, we can see our classes table is selected on the left. So with that selected, up the top, go insert, and we can add some data to our database. So the first lot of data will do, the name of the class will be Introduction to Xcode. Do CS 101. Teacher name is going to be Bill Jobs. Untick the ignore. Then create another set of values. So we'll do UX design for iOS. The room is going to be CS222, and the teacher will be Dr. Gray. Once that's done, in this section here, you'll have insert as new row selected, and then go back to the previous page. So just select go. That's going to add the data to our database. You'll see 2 rows have been inserted here, and you'll see the SQL code to insert those exact values if you wish to replicate it or play around with it. If you want to see the data actually in the database, go to the Browse tab, and you'll see a table down here. So we can see we have 2 records. The first one is Introduction to Xcode, room CS 101 teacher build jobs, then UX design for iOS in room CS 222 with the teacher name Dr. Gray. So with that done, we have our database set up. We're now going to create a web service which will be able to get the data from this table and return it in a JSON format to our iOS app. So let's get into it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is create a RESTful web service. So this is going to get the classes table from our students database and return it in our JSON format for our app to use. Typically, I would write this service in Node.js. It's what I'm familiar with and I prefer this for server-side program. And it's quite popular and pretty easy to use. However, getting it set up in Bluehost isn't complicated, it's a bit tricky. So I'm just going to use PHP this time around because it's quite simple to get set up. If there is interest around Node.js, let me know in the comments below. So what you can see now is I have this getClasses.php file up. So this is PHP code I've went ahead and written. The reason for that is I want to teach you the iOS code and show you this at a high level overview if you wanted to implement it yourself. So I'll quickly go through the PHP code, how it works, and there'll be a paste bin link in the description below that will link you to this code. So the first line here is going to create a SQL connection. So it's going to connect to the local host because this file is going to be hosted on a server. The second thing here is a database user. So we named our user teacher. Remember the prefix for this example was Seemu app. Yours will be something different. The password was password here that we created earlier for that Seemu app teacher user. And the database is called Seemu app _ students because it's a students database. So what we do, we check the connection. If there's any error, we'll output the error to the browser. Otherwise, we'll run this SQL statement, which will select everything from the classes table. Usually with SQL, you shouldn't do a select all. You should specify the data you want. Since this is an example, I'm just going to grab everything. Then if it returns any results, we create a new array. And what we do, we keep on putting the data of each row into this result array. So that will be an array, so just write an example of like the class name, in the classroom, and the teacher name. And it's going to be an array with like arrays inside it of multiple items. And so on. So that's what the format's going to look like. And once we have that array completed, we convert the array to a JSON object here. So this echo JSON encode is going to output it to the browser as a JSON formatted object. And then we close the database connection as it's no longer needed. So to use this in our web service, it's quite simple. What you want to do is to go back to your cPanel. Then you want to scroll on down to files, go to your file manager. In the directory selection, select web root because we want to upload this file to the root of our website folder so we can access it publicly. So what we want to do is select web root here because we want to upload the file to a public directory that will be accessible by our app. Go submit, and this is going to open up a new file manager window. So we'll see our website here, and what we want to do is go to the upload button, go choose file, and then navigate to that file that getClasses.php, go choose. That's going to start the upload, And once it's complete, it will just say the file name 851 bytes complete. Yours might be slightly different. So once that's done, you can go back to the file manager and verify that the file uploaded. Then we can access it through our website. So if we scroll down here, we can see our getclasses.php. So if we go to seemuapps.com/getclasses.php now, so we can see here, we go to seemuapps.com/getclasses.php, and we can see it returns all the items or rows in our class, this table, as a JSON formatted object. So we've got introduction to Xcode, room CS101, teacher name as Bill Jobs, then a UX design for iOS in room CS222 with the teacher name Dr. Gray. So if we go back to here, to our PHP My Admin, we can see the table contents here. So it's essentially retrieving those, formatting it as a JSON object, and then returning this JSON object, which will then be passed to our app, which will be able to interpret and understand it. So that's how you set up a web service. You may have recorded some of my tutorials actually getting JSON data from a web service and passing it. So this is essentially how you set up each individual item, the app, the web service, and database. So let's move on to coding the app to get this JSON object from this URL here and print it out to our console. Okay, so we have a new single view application named web service. And in our view controller.swift, we're going to create a structure called class, and it's going to be of the codable protocol. And in that class, we're going to do let name of the type string, let room of the type string, let teacher of the type string. Then we're going to create a enumeration, name it coding keys, colon the type string and coding key. And in coding keys, we'll do case name equals a string name with an uppercase N. Case room equals room with an uppercase R. And case teacher equals teacher name with an uppercase T and uppercase N. So what this structured class is going to do, and it's codable, not codable. The structured class allows us to pass a JSON. Now in Swift 4, it's a lot easier to pass JSON natively, and this is the way to do it, which I'll cover in more detail in another tutorial. But essentially, what it does is it takes this get classes, and for each record, we can see we've got the name is the key, the value is introduction to Xcode, room with an uppercase R, and teacher name as an uppercase T space uppercase N for name. And that essentially relates the name to name, room to room, and teacher name to teacher. So what we do to get this data from our web service now, in view did load, we'll do let URL equals URL in capitals string. We're going to do, and we are going to use our web service URL here. So if we copy that link from our browser, put it in a string. Now to load that, what we'll do is URL session .shared .data task, and in that with URL, we're going to do URL exclamation mark, then we'll add a comma, we'll add a completion handler, do colon, curly brackets, brackets data, comma, response, comma, error, brackets in. Then we'll do enter a few times. We'll do guard let data equals data, comma, error equals nil, or 2 equals, else we'll do print error exclamation mark, stop that off and return. And at the end, after this operator, we're going to do dot resume. So what we are doing here is we're opening up a new URL session to this URL here with a url.share.data task. So this is going to run in the background while our app runs. And essentially this first line here, we're doing guard let data equals data, error equals nil. So what it's doing, we set this variable called data to be the data that's returned from this URL here. And if the error is nil, we'll continue on down here executing our code. However, if we have an error when we try to load up this URL, such as having no internet connectivity, this code in here will execute print error exclamation mark, close that off. Then the new line character, the carriage return, and return. So that will stop the rest of the code executing, because if you have no internet connection, you don't want to try and start actually extracting that JSON data. So now, after the guard, we'll do let decoder equals JSON decoder. And we'll do let classes equals try question mark decoder dot decode. And in a type, we'll do class as an array with the uppercase C dot self. And from data is going to be data all in lowercase. Then we'll do for my class in classes will print my class dot name, print my class dot teacher, and finally we'll print out my class dot room, and I'll just stick the room above the teacher to match the order we have in the JSON, just for consistency. So now if I run the app, what it's going to do, it's going to call this web service here, loop through all the items and print it out to the console. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so we can see here, Introduction to Xcode in room CS 101, taught by Bill Jobs, is printed out to the console. And then UX Design for iOS in room CS 222, taught by Dr. Gray, is printed out to the console. So remember, this website, web service URL is getting that information from the database, storing it in a JSON format and returning it to our app so it can easily understand the JSON format. And in this code here, after the guard, we create a new JSON decoder. Then in this classes variable, we try and decode a JSON object. And we use this class structure, which matches our JSON object from the web service. And it's an array of classes. So that's matching the structure of it. And the actual JSON data is in here. So it tries to put this data into this classes variable using that class structure. Then we print out all the classes to the console. So what you could do from here is put that in a table view and actually use it in your app and so on. So this was just a very high level overview of how each of those works, from the database to the web service to the app. It was quite basic for each item, but to give you a good overview of how it works. So even if you don't need to implement all of it, you actually understand how it works, which is quite useful to have when working with other people. And you can download the source code for this below. And don't forget to subscribe and like for more tutorials.